the city of the displaced, when Burkina Faso redefines the meaning of rebuilding a nation. There's a question that's making the whole world pause. Why is Ibrahim Traoré doing this? And how without the West? To understand, you must leave the capital, Ouagadougou, and head north, where the desert wind carries the scent of dry earth and the rumble of heavy trucks. There, in a place once marked on maps as a danger zone, something extraordinary is happening quietly, without ceremony, without press releases, without fanfare. Truck convoys unload thousands of tons of materials. Rows of concrete pillars rise from the ground as if summoned by a sacred command. Engineers, builders, architects, and soldiers work day and night. No foreign reporters, no Western cameras, only the clang of hammers, the roar of bulldozers, and the voices of workers in military fatigues. The outside world doesn't know what's going on. No news bulletins, no official statements, no explanations. Only when the first drone videos surfaced on local social media showing a city emerging from dust did people begin to understand Burkina Faso is building its own future. But this isn't a new urban zone nor a typical resettlement project. It's a political declaration in concrete and flesh. A testament that even amid ruin, a nation can choose to rise by its own hands. At the heart of it all stands Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the man who has baffled the world by refusing to play by the rules of post-colonial Africa. He's not the kind of leader who reads speeches written by foreign consultants. He doesn't beg for aid, sign new deals, or promise development partnerships. This time, the enemy he's fighting carries no flag. It's the collapse from within, the invisible virus that can destroy a nation without a single gunshot. Because before Traoré took power, Burkina Faso stood on the edge of one of the world's worst internal displacement crises. Over 2 million people, farmers, miners, teachers, children, had been forced to flee their villages because of violence, terrorism, drought, and hunger. They didn't leave by choice, they left to survive. Fertile lands became battlegrounds. Homes turned to ashes. And when they reached the cities, there was nowhere left for them to go. Ouagadougou, Kaya, Dori, Koudougou cities, already overcrowded, became suffocating wounds piled atop one another. On the outskirts grew the shadow cities, where people lived under torn plastic sheets, surrounded by red dust and smoke, where children grew up never knowing clean water or electricity. The world called it a humanitarian issue. International organizations called it a crisis requiring aid. But to Traoré, it was a verdict on a failed system. One morning at the start of the rainy season, during a cabinet meeting, he placed his hand on a map spread across the table and pointed to abandoned lands, once terrorist bases, and said, "If we can reclaim this land from gunmen, why can't we reclaim it for our people?" From that question, the project codenamed Ville Renaissance, the city of rebirth, was born. No UN plans, no World Bank blueprints, no ODA loans. Only political will and the hands of the Burkinabe people. Within 6 months, military engineers were clearing land, channeling water, building schools, roads, and homes. Each neighborhood was designed with clinics, wells, vocational centers, and solar power stations. The government called it a modern resettlement zone, but people had another name for it, the City of Hope. Those who once lived in makeshift refugee camps became the very builders of their new city. A former farmer turned bricklayer. A single mother carried bricks. An orphan boy learned to operate a bulldozer. No one was called a victim anymore, they were nation rebuilders. When European journalists asked about funding, Traoré simply smiled. From our land, from our gold, and from our own hands. For decades, Burkina Faso mined gold for the world, yet its people remained among the poorest on earth. Now, for the first time, Burkina's gold was building homes for Burkinabe, not filling vaults in Geneva or Paris. It was a reversal of history itself. And the Western media, they stayed silent. Because this story had no place for them. No white saviors, no humanitarian heroes, no pitiful victims. Only a nation standing up to own its destiny. And that, for those accustomed to power, is the hardest truth to swallow. The first images of Ville Renaissance flooded local networks, igniting hearts across the country. People shared them, volunteered, donated materials, many even returned home to help. A teacher wrote online, "I once taught children the alphabet. Now I teach them to read the name of their homeland again." An old man, eyes wet, said, "I don't know if my son will see peace, but I want my grandson to be born in the land we built ourselves." Every brick laid down was more than construction, it was a statement of dignity. Traoré understood, when a nation loses its homes, it loses its memory. And when memory fades, a country becomes nothing more than a name on a map. That's why rebuilding houses wasn't just a social act, it was a strategic one. He wasn't just resettling people, he was redefining citizenship, rekindling community spirit, and rebuilding trust between state and people. No more waiting for international aid. No more endless lines for food rations. Instead, training centers, solar stations, and reclaimed farmlands began to surround the new towns. Burkina Faso was no longer a crisis nation. It had become a laboratory of self-determination. Analysts in Europe and America called it a bold gamble. But to Traoré, it wasn't a gamble, it was the only thing left to believe in. In a brief, unscripted press conference, he said, "We're not building cities to be praised. We're building them to tell the world, even when pushed to the edge, Africans can still create their own path." Today, if you fly over northern Ouagadougou, you'll see thousands of red-tiled roofs stretching across the horizon between green fields and shimmering solar panels under the Sahel Sunday. No skyscrapers, no malls, no flashy financial districts, but something far rarer, faith and purpose. Those who once lived in fear are now citizens of a new hope. Children who once wandered refugee camps now go to school, play soccer, laugh under roofs their parents built. A nation once defined by loss is now being redefined by the will to rise again. The first stage of construction includes over 12,000 homes with full roads, power lines, and water infrastructure laid in advance. Each unit is being constructed not as temporary relief, but as a permanent dwelling. They're not hidden on the periphery of the city. They are the city. Eyewitnesses who managed to visit the site early described it as eerily organized with an atmosphere more like a military operation than a typical construction project. No setting up tents, no foreign contractors giving orders, and no signs of UN branding. Just uniformed planners, local workers, and rows of rising homes. Modest, yes, but structured with precision and care. Inside True's administration, officials refer to this project in quiet terms as a civilian fortification. A home, they say, is more than shelter. It's a weapon against chaos. In a country surrounded by instability, mass migration, and foreign manipulation, giving your people permanent ground beneath their feet is a revolutionary act. And make no mistake, this is a revolution. By keeping everything under wraps, Traoré avoided the usual traps, bloated proposals, years of delays, donor, restrictions, and corruption that bleeds resources before a single wall is raised. Instead, he turned to state-owned enterprises, military, engineering units, and a new network of local suppliers. Many of these contractors had never worked on anything beyond small-scale housing before, but we're now operating at full national capacity. While critics abroad question the pace and cost, no one can deny the sheer audacity of it. Burkina Faso, a country often labeled as aid-dependent, is now doing what even rich nations hesitate to try, building a city from scratch for people who own nothing. And it's just the beginning, because the blueprints go beyond homes. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. Now, to understand the soul of this project, you must understand who these people are and why. Traoré is defying the global order to build a city for them. Burkina Faso is not at war with another country. It's at war with fragments of itself, armed groups, foreign-backed insurgents, desertification, and decades of neglect. These forces have forced millions to flee their ancestral homes. Entire villages have been emptied overnight. Children have watched their homes burn. Parents have buried loved ones without coffins. And women have given birth in the open under skies that offer no shelter. Many of the displaced are subsistence farmers, uprooted from land. Their families have tilled for generations. Others were teachers, civil servants, cattle herders, or market vendors. Ordinary people swallowed by extraordinary instability. When they fled, they didn't become refugees in another country. They became internally displaced, statistically present, but politically homeless, and then came a quiet decision from above. They would not be managed, they would be housed. Traoré's housing project is not merely infrastructure, it is a redefinition of national belonging. Unlike international refugee camps, where aid determines your fate and shelter is temporary, the people selected for trial city are being given deeds. They are not tenants, they are owners. The criteria for selection go far beyond just refugee status. Widows, many of whom lost husbands in military operations or insurgent attacks, are being prioritized. So are disabled persons who cannot find work in traditional villages. War veterans long discarded by the state, after their service are being called back, not to fight, but to live in dignity. Youth-headed households where children as young as 16 have become de facto parents after family loss are being placed in housing with special support services. And then there are the families that defy paperwork, those without national ID, without birth certificates, without any formal record of existing. In most countries, they would be disqualified for lack of documentation. Intra-city, they are manually verified through local leaders, neighborhood councils, and oral records. But it goes deeper than humanitarian. Aid. TRIA understands what most policymakers miss. Displacement isn't just about losing shelter, it's about losing identity. When a family is forced to live in a tent for 6 years, their children forget what home even means. When a man cannot provide a roof for his household, it breaks more than tradition. It breaks the man himself. This city is an answer to that fracture. It's a mass act of psychological repair, an attempt to bring people back from the margins, not as dependent, but as citizens. This is who the city is for. But what kind of city awaits them? Because this isn't a return to the past. It's a leap into a future many never imagined Africa could lead. Step into Traoré City, and the first thing you'll notice isn't the buildings, it's the silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but the quiet hum of systems that work. Solar panels gleam under the Burkina Bay. Sunday pipes run smoothly beneath freshly paved roads. Digital meters blink to life inside modest homes. And all of it, every wall, every wire was built with the future in mind, not just survival. President Ibrahim Traoré didn't just order the construction of homes. He commissioned a living system, a city, engineered from scratch to prove that Africa doesn't need to borrow progress, it can build it. Each neighborhood in Traoré City is structured around community cores, clusters of essential services like schools, health clinics, water stations, and food markets. These cores are never more than a 10-minute walk from any home for elderly residents and disabled persons. Flat ramps, handrails, and specialized mobility. Access points are woven into the layout, not as afterthoughts, but as standard design. The transportation system is electric from day one. No combustion engines. Solar-charged buses follow wide, clearly mapped lanes connecting housing, blocks to agricultural zones, workshops, and administrative centers. There are no traffic jams, no carbon smog, no decades late upgrades. This is what cities look like when built from zero with modern tech and no colonial hangover. But the most revolutionary design lies beneath the surface. Green water systems and subsurface irrigation belts. Engineers have embedded low flow channels beneath the soil, capturing gray water from homes and redirecting it to fuel crops and trees planted across the city's perimeter. These agricultural belts will grow maize, okra, and sorghum enough to feed tens of thousands. In a region hit hard by food insecurity, the city is engineered to feed itself. Construction materials were locally sourced and environmentally rated. Bricks are produced using compressed earth block technology. a low-carbon method developed by Burkina Faso engineers that requires no large-scale factories or imports. Window shades are angled to reduce indoor heat, lowering the need for artificial cooling. And for the internet, instead of relying on foreign providers, the city is connected through a new public fiber grid owned and operated by a Burkina-based state telecom partner. This is no accident. Traoré's team brought in not Western consultants, but young Burkina Faso architects, agricultural scientists, and engineers, many of whom had never been given serious government contracts before. Now they're shaping what some urbanists are calling Africa's first fully sovereign smart city. But the most profound detail isn't in the blueprints, it's in the process. The city was built with the displaced, not just for them. Before the first wall went up, teams were deployed to speak with women, elders, youth, and former soldiers living in displacement camps. What did they want in a home? What had they lost that mattered most? How far should schools be from clinics? Where should the mosque sit in the market? One planner revealed, we didn't draw the city on paper. We drew it from memory. The memory of what people had before the war took it away. This bottom-up philosophy extends into governance. Each neighborhood will elect its local council with a reserved seat for youth and one for women. Dispute resolution mechanisms are rooted in a blend of customary law and modern legal norms, with mobile legal clinics set to patrol the area weekly. Traoré City isn't a copy of Paris or Dubai or some polished Western capital. It's something rarer, a Burkina Faso blueprint grounded in the realities of its people, yet reaching for the future. It's proof that modern doesn't have to, foreign and independence doesn't have to mean isolation. But with this defiance of the status quo, one question hangs in the air. What does this mean for Africa's place in the global order? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue. Now, behind closed doors in Brussels, Washington, and Paris, diplomats are whispering not because they don't understand what's happening in Burkina Faso, but because they do. Traoré City rising quietly on West African soil without the permission or participation of any Western power is a direct threat to a global system built on dependency. This isn't just a housing project. It's a political act. And across the global south, leaders are beginning to ask the unthinkable. If Burkina Faso can do this, why can't we? In traditional development models, Africa is positioned as the recipient. Loans, grants, technical advisors, debt, and austerity packages are handed down like gospel. For decades, African infrastructure came with strings, IMF audits, World Bank conditionalities, and EU monitoring frameworks. Progress was measured in how well you followed the Western manual, but Traoré just tore up the manual and rewrote the terms. There are no international lenders involved, no visible branding from USAID, the UN, or the EU. The city is being built with state funds, local expertise, and African labor with zero dependence on the traditional donor circuit. That isn't just financially unusual. It's philosophically dangerous for those who profit from Africa's permanent state of need. And this silence from Western capitals is louder than condemnation. Traoré's government has received no formal congratulations from its so-called development partners, no invitations to urban innovation forums, no op-eds in The Economist praising his bold new approach. Some Western media outlets continue to frame him as a populist soldier who threatens democratic norms. Why? Because the model he's creating could spread. Imagine what happens if Mali, Niger, Chad, or even parts of Nigeria begin replicating this approach, housing the displaced with no World Bank loans, building solar grids, without Siemens contracts and feeding their people without importing rice from European markets. That would break the entire aid industry's logic that poor nations must be managed, not empowered. Tri-City isn't just domestically sovereign, it's developmentally sovereign. And that scares people. It also inspires, for many Africans, especially the young, this isn't just about homes. It's about proof. Proof that Africa can imagine and execute its future. Proof that aid isn't the only route to dignity. Proof that leadership can mean more than speeches and photo ops. It can mean roads, bricks, and working toilets. And while the West remains mostly silent, other players are taking notice. China's state media has begun airing subtle praise of the project, especially its emphasis on local materials and independence from Western lenders. Russia, already locked in economic partnerships with the Sahel, sees and Traoré, a regional partner who reflects its defiance of US and European power. Even Turkey, through its development agency TICA, has shown signs of quiet admiration, but Traoré hasn't aligned with any bloc he has made it clear. Burkina Faso will not be someone else's project. That position neutral, unapologetic, and homegrown is starting to feel less like an exception and more like the prototype of a new African politics. So now we must ask, can this lone effort spark a continental shift? Is Traoré just building a city or starting a revolution? There are moments in history when a single act reshapes what a people believe is possible. The American civil rights movement had Selma, South Africa had Sutu, and today Africa may have Trial Race City, a place that began as a housing initiative but is quickly morphing into something far larger, a philosophy of governance grounded in self-reliance, dignity, and revolutionary urbanism. What Traoré has done isn't just visionary, it's contagious. Already whispers of replication are gaining volume. In Niger, Transitional, authorities facing their displacement crisis are reportedly studying the novel Esprit blueprint, seeking to adapt it for communities abandoned after French military withdrawals. In Mali, there are early reports of military-owned civil engineers surveying zones for similar people-first infrastructure experiments. And in Guinea and CAR, youth activists are openly calling for cities of justice to be built for war-affected populations. These are not copycats. They are reflections. Because what Traoré has tapped into is not just unmet housing demand. It's a hunger for systems that put people before profit. For decades, African development has been channeled through what economists call growth-centric models. Roads that connect mines, ports that serve exports, and housing built to attract foreign investment. But what Traoré has done flips that script. A city not designed to impress outsiders, but to reclaim the lives of those who were never supposed to be seen. And perhaps most powerfully, this new model doesn't wait for global validation. That's critical because for so long, Africa has been told that its ideas must be refined, approved, and often diluted by outside institutions. But Traoré skipped the application process. No feasibility studies from European think tanks, no approval rounds from World Bank boards, no best practice. Recommendations from foreign consultants, just action. And that action has created an urban prototype that serves as proof of concept that Africa can design its own spaces, build them with its own hands, and inhabit them on its terms. Social media, too, has become a battlefield of narrative control. In past decades, projects like this might have remained obscure, filtered only through Western headlines. Something is happening across Africa quietly, yet echoing like a drum, calling a people's soul. From Nairobi to Lagos, from Kigali to Accra, millions are watching the progress videos of a small city rising in Burkina Faso. Every day, they watch, they share, they analyze each technical blueprint, each housing design, each planning philosophy. Debates are erupting in online forums. Could this be the first model of urban sovereignty, African cityhood on its own terms? That phrase, once an obscure academic concept, is now becoming the symbol of an entire generation's mindset. No one is waiting for permission anymore. Africa is beginning to think out loud. And Trial City, the pilot city, forged by Ibrahim Traoré's own hands, is becoming the living proof of that awakening. In departments of urban planning across Lusaka, Kampala, and Dakar, student contests titled "Designing for the People" are being launched. Young designers lean over their screens not to imitate Paris or Dubai, but to ask a simpler question. If a city has a soul, who should it belong to? Meanwhile, in late-night radio shows from Accra to Addis Ababa, the hosts pose the same haunting question. If Burkina Faso can build a city for its poor, why can't we? Phone lines burn with hundreds of calls. Some talk about social justice, some about financial independence, and some simply say, I just want to live in a city where I don't have to ask permission to exist. And then, like a river flowing outward, the movement reaches the African diaspora across the Americas and the Caribbean. African Americans, Afro-Brazilians, Caribbeans, peoples carrying the broken memory of centuries of enslavement now see in this project a reflection of their own soul. To them, this is more than Burkina Faso's success. It's a challenge to the idea that Africa always lags behind. It's a reminder that even from the most despised soil, light can still rise. In New York, a group of African engineers hosts a podcast on sovereign infrastructure. In Havana, architecture students pin the Trial City model on classroom walls as a case study in self-reliance. In São Paulo, Afro-descendant collectivists gather for a symposium titled Back to Build. Not a return in body, but in knowledge, faith, and the dream of an Africa building its own future. But every revolution meets an invisible wall. Behind headlines about the City of Hope, whispers begin to circulate. Diplomatic cables, quiet warnings of cooperation from embassies, risk assessments on ministers' desks, regional banks tightening credit, international agencies monitoring Burkina Faso's monetary policies. No one says don't do it, but every signal carries the same unspoken message. Know your place. Because if other African nations follow Traoré's path, refusing debt, building infrastructure from domestic resources, ending urban projects that serve only the elite, what happens to the industries and institutions that have lived off controlling them for centuries? That's why the success of Trial City isn't just about red rooftops, paved roads, or bustling markets. It's a test of history itself, a living proof that housing doesn't have to be a luxury. Governments can serve the poor first, and Africa doesn't need permission to begin. Because if a city can rise from Burkina's dust, debt-free, aid-free, unbowed, then 100 more could rise across the continent. Not to chase the West, but to rewrite what development means for Africans. Imagine this. On Ghana's coast, another trial city powered by wind and sea. In Rwanda, architecture students designing green communities that heal farmland. In Nigeria, young people leaving megacities to build sovereign villages, energy and tech, self-sufficient. In Mali, veterans founding trade schools to train the first builders of a Sahel renaissance. If that happens, then Traoré hasn't just built a city, he's ignited a movement. But every movement begins with a question. And that question today echoes far beyond Africa, reaching every place that once looked down on it with pity. Would you choose to live in a city built on dignity, not debt? A city where human worth is measured by effort, not by bank accounts? A city where children grow up not on promises of aid, but in the light of the energy they create? Because if African nations unite to build cities like Traoré's, where justice replaces privilege, autonomy replaces dependency, and the poorest live with dignity, who will be the first to try to stop them? Because power never fears poverty. It only fears the poor discovering they can live without power. Tonight, in Africa's cafes, people aren't talking about migrating to Europe anymore. They're talking about rebuilding home. In universities, students debate the philosophy of human-centered cities. In small villages, farmers ask, if they can do it in Burkina, why can't we? That is the most dangerous contagion of all, the contagion of belief. Trial City may be only a few thousand houses, but its meaning goes far beyond concrete walls. It is a manifesto for a generation that refuses to bow, a reminder that freedom isn't granted, it's built brick by brick with faith in hand. One day, when history rewrites this era, people may not remember every street name or neighborhood, but they'll remember that somewhere in the Sahel, a nation chose to build its own roof instead of waiting for pity. And if you're watching this video, ask yourself, are we witnessing a housing project or the dawn of the Great African Reset? A rebirth not launched by banks, but by belief. Not led by superpowers, but by ordinary people, those who have been silenced for far too long. If you believe Africa deserves more than what the world has told it to be, share this story, comment, subscribe, because here we tell the stories the world is afraid to tell. We speak of Black culture, Black civilization, Black history, and of the living proof that Black greatness never vanished. It was only buried beneath the dust of those who wrote history. Thank you for watching till the end. And as always, stay with us, because this flame is only just beginning.